Hi everybody, thank you very much for watching Funk Stylers TV. I'm Inga Be and I am in New York, so this gives me the great opportunity to interview B.Polite, also known as B.Polite.
Peace.
And thank you very much for your time and your experience and your knowledge. And today, basically, what I wanted to ask Brian is about the club culture in New York City and also about house dancing. But before we go into that, could you please talk a little bit more about yourself and how you got involved in dancing?
All right. I've been dancing for the most part most of my life, as much as I can remember, since I was a child. In terms of like all the styles, it was like we just kind of grew up seeing stuff on television. So when you're a little kid, your parents are watching Motown and you're watching the Temptations and the Four Tops. Get a little bit older, and then like I was a little kid during like the beginning of the 80s. So I was like 8, 9, around the time when like, you know, like breakdancing had kind of like reached its, you know, its peak. It peaked out like in New York, I think maybe around like 84 maybe even, but like because everybody else around the country was kind of late, you know, it was still like a big thing, you know, for people to like see breakdancing until like about like 86. So even though it was out of style here, a lot of guys said they were kind of over it by like 85. You know, for me, it was just like it's still the big thing. People were still like popping. You still occasionally saw people locking, like the break-in movies. Beat Street was on VHS, you know, by like the middle 80s or so. So like, that was my exposure to like a lot of those styles. I left the country for a few years and I came back. It was right at the beginning of like the whole new school era. So like people doing like, you know, the Running Man and the RoboCop and the Fila and all those party dances, you know, in the freestyle hip hop era. So I saw all of that, you know, just as I was starting middle school. So I was like 12, 13, you know, catching all that era. And because I had been gone for a while, I was like, oh, I got to get back in. I got to know what all the new stuff is. I haven't seen it. So I was, you know, watching every music video I could to like pick up all the steps. And then when I came to New York for college in '95, that was when I was introduced to like the New York club scene. So it started out, I went to an open mic at Frank's Lounge called Tea Party. It's not the crazy Republican thing, but it was an open mic / party that was put together by Ian Friday, and he would host the open mic, and then he would afterwards play music. So I was, you know, writing poetry from high school. I'd been to a couple of open mics in New York, and people were like, oh, you got to go to Tea Party though, like it's amazing, it'll blow your mind. And went, and the poetry was amazing, the vibe was great, you know. Erykah Badu was there before she, you know, had a record out.
Okay.
She was like one of the people who used to come through and hang out. Mos Def used to come through and hang out before he had a record out. People like Jessica Care Moore and Saul Williams and Mums the Schemer, you know, like all these like spoken word artists that are big now and that have traveled. You know, there were, you know, all these like, you know, poets that have you know, made a name for themselves, you know, from like the 90s, you know, and on. Kind of everybody was all kind of like around each other. It wasn't a separation yet. Like the dancers knew DJs, knew musicians, knew the writers, knew the performance artists, knew the musicians, and everybody was just kind of like one big artistic conglomeration. And then a lot of people had multiple talents. So like, oh, my man DJs, but then he also acts. Oh, my homegirl, she sings, but then she's also an amazing writer of poetry. You know, oh, this guy does spoken word, but then he can also rap. You know, like everybody was doing everything. Oh, this person, you know, like literally everything. So I went to this place, and it was the first time I saw like the underground. Like I knew hip hop, I knew a little bit about reggae, but like in terms of like underground house, I had no clue. And so when Ian started playing, I was like, oh, this is cool. And then when I started looking to see people dance, it was just like, oh wow, what's all this? You know, like I was familiar with like what people teach in show folk as house dance now. I was familiar with a lot of that. I didn't realize it at the time, but all those videos that I was watching, they were almost everybody from like the Mop Tops. It's like Mop Tops and Wise Guys and who was it? And the Misfits. So like I didn't realize it was them. But now, looking back on it and having met a couple of people and knowing a couple of folk, now when I look at the videos, it's like, wait, that's Khalif. Oh my God, I remember this video from when I was 12 years old. I've been trying to imitate Khalif all these years, and I didn't realize that was him. You know, like the Crystal Waters video, She's Homeless. Like, that's Khalif and Peter Paul. I forgot who the other guy is in it. But like, I immediately, like, I saw it again recently for the first time in like years. And I was like, oh wait, I know them. So you mean all this time that I've been watching these videos when I was younger trying to pick up moves is guys that I would meet 10 years later, you know, in my, you know, it's like I'm in my early teens and I'm trying to copy stuff from a music video. Now I'm in my early 20s and I know these people, you know, I broke bread with them, you know, hung out, know some of the people in their family, like, you know, like spent, you know, hours like talking about dance and everything. It's kind of amazing, you know, but like that was my introduction to, like, you know, in terms of like loft style, and like a lot of like the real underground, the whole baby powder and, you know, sweatpants thing. Like Tea Party was my introduction to that, and into the introduction also of house and club culture, in terms of like just how you maneuver through it. That was also an introduction, because I used to think of house as, you know, a branch off of like hip hop, because that's how it was introduced. For folk of my generation, it was introduced to us via hip hop. Like, we heard house music, but it wasn't anything that anybody really paid attention to. And I'm saying this, and like, I'm 36. You know, it's like I got nothing to hide. You know, so like I'm saying this is someone that's like the tail end of like Generation X. You know, so when everybody else is talking about being in the clubs, you know, like when Marjorie and them talk about being in the clubs and being out and partying, like, I was too young. I was too young to see the closing of the garage. They wouldn't have let me in. Like, there's no way. They wouldn't have let me in, but there. I was too young to catch any of the underground, a lot of those clubs that everybody talks about from like the 90s, like the early 90s. I wasn't even in New York for any of that. You know, so the only thing I had was like the music videos, the occasional like barbecue party, school dance. That was, you know, so that was how we kept up with everything. Oh, such and such is having a party at their house. Oh, they're having a party at the recreation center. Oh, there's a school dance coming up. You know, oh, this, you see such and such, they showed a video on Rap City last week. You know, you got to watch it this week so you can catch it. You know, that's how you kept up with whatever dances. You know, I was in Virginia. You know, so that's kind of like worlds away from New York. But yeah, so there was just, that was how I picked everything up in terms of like the culture of it. Was just, I came to Tea Party and just met everybody and was just like, wow, this is astonishing. And then from there, as I just started going out to events, people would introduce me to somebody, you know, or a lot of times they would introduce me, I would meet them at a random other place. So I would, you know, see them at the club and, you know, oh, hey, and then go and dance, and then to be somewhere else random, you know, on the train, walking down the street, you know, hear somebody be like, hey, what? Hey, you. Hey, weren't you at the such and such party? Hey, man. And that's how I would meet like a lot of people too. Like I would see them at the party, but we wouldn't really talk. But then they'd see me on the train or on the streets and then be like, hey, don't I know you, kid? I mean, actually, it happened not too far from where we're at right now. A guy that was old school dancer, Hakeem. He was a mentor of a cat that mentored me in terms of like footwork and got me back into like locking. Rashim, who passed away, God bless his spirit. He was, you know, God drove a mail truck. And so I was walking, you know, crossing Willoughby, and, you know, the next thing you know, this guy yelling at me from a mail truck. And I was like, what? What is this guy yelling about? Hey, man. Look, it's like, Hakeem? Hey, kid, what's happening? Like, you know, just like, and it's like a lot of the old school dancers, there wasn't like, it was underground, so there wasn't like a industry. There wasn't like as Sekou calls it, you know, a dance industrial complex. you know, to like get famous off of. And there wasn't YouTube, and nobody on television was really interested in what was going on in the clubs like that. So nobody got famous off it. Nobody was thinking about getting famous. They danced because they loved the music, they loved the community. And then they would go back to their lives. You know, you work your day job, you know, you feed your kids, and then, okay, it's Saturday night, I'm going to go to this party, and this party, and then come back in Sunday morning. And maybe if I have energy, go to church. If not, I'll just sleep all day. No, some people managed to pull it off. Or some people, the club became church for them. So they would go specifically. So there was a point, I can't remember exactly when, someone told me there was a point where Larry Levan at the Paradise Garage used to have like a disco, like gospel disco stuff going on. So like Saturday night into Sunday, he would play. So you basically play like all the regular like party stuff, but then coming into like Sunday morning, he'd still be DJing, and he would start playing like a whole set of like gospel disco music, you know. So like if you ever heard the song "Stand on the Word," like that's like a garage classic. You know, and that's a straight up like gospel thing. That's something that Larry Levan actually, I think he was like he did the mix on that also. Like he was responsible for like mixing that song. Okay. But like that, the Clark sisters, the Clark sisters song, what's the name of the song? Please don't let it elude me today. I think it's "Can I Get a Witness," but I'm probably very wrong. I'm not sure. But it's like an old Clark sisters like gospel song, but it's like really popular in the clubs of all places. And there's a place you would never expect anybody to really be on it like that. But there were a couple of like inspirational and gospel tunes that would be mixed in, and you create a set out of it. And a lot of people, it just kind of like that's part of what made it the church. You had the whole like community of people, everybody sharing this really beautiful and open vibe, and you got the DJ like uplifting it by playing like these really like spiritually uplifting records.
And even though you like the concrete experience in some of the first disco or house music clubs, I just want to say to everyone that apart from being a dancer, Brian is a researcher and educator and, an artist, a member of the Afro Mosaic dance, well, I would say artist collective actually.
Yeah.
And
Afro Mosaic Soul, yeah.
And they also host a monthly house music night called Libation. So
Ian Friday, shout out to Ian Friday, shout out to Manchild Black, shout out to Monster Black, Caroline, Mert. I think that's everybody. I hope that's everybody. Yes.
So you talked a little bit about how you got involved in clubbing and what it meant to other people. Can I ask you about the beginnings of clubbing culture? Basically, what was the environment? What were the people like? What was the music like? And the dancing?
The beginnings of club culture.
In New York, specifically.
In New York, I know. I'm trying to figure out how far back to go. There's something, to go way back, there was, Brooklyn Terry had said that there was an interview that he had done where he talked about in New York, people kind of have been clubbing as almost like a lifestyle, almost since like the jazz age. Like if you look at like the Lindy Hoppers and everything else, like they kind of all knew each other. They had like a community of people that would go and dance and kind of all be familiar with each other. So even going back to like like the 30s and 40s, all the way to today. In terms of the modern club culture, a lot of people trace it back to like 4 places basically: the Gallery with Nicky Siano, Paradise Garage with Larry Levan, Studio 54 with Nicky Siano again, because after he left the Gallery, he went to Studio 54, and the Loft, David Mancuso. Most of the older heads talk about dancing and going out from like 68. So before it was even disco. At the time, it was just soul music and funk, like the beginnings of funk. Disco originally was talked about as being like danceable soul. That's what it was. It was basically like just soul music, but just a little bit more dance, like, you know, faster pace, but essentially soul music. The change really was just the drum pattern. You know, it was like the whole four on the four on the floor drum pattern. That's kind of like where people look at it as like, okay, this is straight up disco versus like soul with like strings. So like, because Isaac Hayes was doing soul music or like all this lush orchestration. Barry White was doing soul music, like really beautiful orchestration around it. But then, you know, when the whole sound of Philadelphia, you know, Philly International sound, the who was it? There was guys responsible for like Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes, like the whole like Philadelphia soul sound basically gave birth to disco. You know, like they created that sound and then kind of spread it everywhere else. Like a lot of, so like The Love I Lost is considered like the first disco record. It's the first record that has the four on the floor. You know, a lot of people have tried to say other songs, but those songs are basically funk or soul records. You know, like disco, normally when people talk about disco, it's the whole like, you know, kick drum is marking every single beat. And then on the off beats, you have like the open hi-hat. So you got the and that was like the kind of the first time where like that pattern kind of appeared. You know, was The Love I Lost, Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes. And then from there, they just kind of like started incorporating it into everything, and it got bigger, and other people started like, you know, adjusting to that style and trying to get that sound and developing their own brands of disco. I guess, well, the people who were into it. Then there were folk that were not interested in disco at all, and those are a lot of people that were doing like funk. Then you had with jazz and the whole fusion thing started by Miles Davis. So then you had people experimenting with taking what he was doing with psychedelic rock and then doing that with like, you know, funk and with, you know, soul and disco. So that's what like the funk jazz and the jazz funk and, you know, the jazz soul experimentation. So you get Roy Ayers comes out of that. George Duke's, his whole experimentation, Donald Byrd and the Blackbirds, all of that. So a lot of those sounds were what was being played in the clubs then. You know, so you had like the Loft is considered like one of like the very beginnings of it. It started off as a house party. It started off as like you know, David Mancuso needed to pay his rent. So rent party, I'm gonna invent some friends over, pay a little bit of money, I pay my rent, and we keep partying. And then when people were like, you need to make this like a real venue, you know, in New York, it's not like other places. You need a license for everything. You need state permission to do everything, city permission to do everything, permits. And if you don't have a permit, you take a risk, because that means that the city can roll up on you at any moment and shut you down because you don't have a permit. So his way of getting around it was, I don't serve liquor, I don't serve food. So, and this is a private, you know, club. So what he did is he had memberships. People were members of the Loft, and you could bring a guest. So you paid your money, your guests paid their money, and it was a way of keeping everything under control. Because, you know, if you bring a guest somewhere, you're not going to bring a guest somewhere and then lose your membership and not be able to come back, especially if you love the party. So you would only bring people you thought, okay, this guy's going to be cool. They're not going to act up if they come here. They're going to respect the space. Because since people can only bring so many guests, the numbers will always kind of be about the same. And everybody will know that's your guest. Because they'd be like, yo, who brought this guy here? Oh, it was Joe. Joe, what? You know, it's that sort of deal. Okay. So, you know, so that was kind of the start of the whole membership thing. I mean, it sounds crazy now. Like, oh, you had to be a member to get in, you know, but that's what it was. Or like, you know, with like, you know, the Garage where like, you know, you were online and people had to like, you know, choose you. Like there, you had your membership, which gave you a certain amount of privileges, but then also people had to like, you know, okay, you can come in, right, you can come in, not you. I don't like that shirt. Like the face control, right? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Even if you were a member. It was kind of. I mean, that part I'm not sure about. Okay. But I know that if you weren't a member, like you normally, there was no way that you were getting in unless a member brought you in. And a lot of times people would be on the line hoping that, asking people, paying people extra, like, yo, take me in with you. Here's some money, and then pay to get in afterwards. Because it was a very exclusive thing. The scene in New York also was, the beginnings of it came out of gay culture. That's one of the things that a lot of people don't like to talk about. But you're talking about like the post-civil rights, post-Stonewall, post-women's rights in New York City. So like a lot of these clubs that started opening and flourishing is because gay community after Stonewall could actually gather without threat of arrest and police raids. So so a lot of these clubs that they started were like, okay, now we can actually like be around each other and we can go out and have a good time. Because before then, a gay club was basically somebody was playing music, you couldn't dance. If you did dance, you couldn't actually dance with anybody. You had to sit only so many people at a table. Can't touch anybody. You want to see you guys touching each other. So it's like
that was in the regular clubs.
No,
right?
not even. No, that was in the gay clubs.
Okay.
In like the 60s, like in the 60s and before, like the few that exist, and they were controlled by the mafia.
Oh, okay.
Because there's no way anyone could ever do any of those things legally. You would get arrested, your face would be put in the paper, name in the paper as a deviant. You could lose everything. So the mafia basically ran those clubs, and they, so you do a couple of payoffs, the police aren't going to raid the place. So then you say, well, now it's still my rules. So you guys this is about as good as it gets.
Okay.
And so they had to play by those rules. Afterwards, that changed the dynamic. So when they actually started up, clubs like the Garage, or the Saint, which is another like very prominent gay club from like the 70s, it was like, okay, we can do what we want. And that's kind of the good and bad of it, I guess. Because the whole 70s like disco era was very much about people just kind of feeling like, I got complete freedom. And so it goes from like, I have complete freedom to like, hey, I have complete freedom. And so a lot of those crazy stories you hear about like the Studio 54 and the drugs and the sex and the excess is because people, they got free, and some of them got a little too free. So it went from like this whole open freeness to like this almost like decadent freeness. In some cases coming into like even the 80s, like, as the disco era, as the disco peaked in terms of popularity, like in terms of like New York and especially the underground, it was still going. And in a lot of cases, people just changed the name. So like when people, like there's all this post-disco R&B, they just started calling it club in New York. In Chicago, they started calling it house. But its intent and its inspiration was still very much disco inspired. But it's just the thing where like, okay, fine, you don't want to call it disco, doesn't matter, we'll call it dance music, we'll call it house music, we'll call it club music. We won't call it anything, we'll just say it's R&B again, and it sounds like the same thing we did back in 79, but it's 82.
Okay.
And that's why like a lot of things kind of get confusing when people start saying disco records, and then you start looking at the dates on it, it's like, but this is from 82. I thought disco was only in the 70s. But people were still pushing music with that sound, and the sound was still doing fairly well. Like, so even with all this whole rock and roll disco sucks backlash, people still managed to make it work. And I feel like I digressed crazily, so I didn't even know if I even answered the question initially that I was asked to.
No,
okay.
You did. It was, I asked about the environment
culture,
and the people.
Right.
But I do want to ask.
It's also scary in New York too. It was like, in terms of like, New York of the 70s, like the middle 70s, going into like 77. And actually, yeah, it was like a lot of cities were experiencing a lot of urban decay. So after the civil rights movement, once you had integration, a lot of black families that could afford to move out of the ghettos and the hood did. And they moved to like better neighborhoods. Because that was the whole point of like, the thing is like, okay, now I've been able to afford to move out, but I couldn't get a house there. They wouldn't allow me to buy a house there. Now I can buy a house there. So people were picking up, moving to new places, give their family a better life. But what was happening was that because that was happening in the city, a lot of white people that weren't interested in living around black folk were like, you know what? well, then we're leaving the city. How about that? So they started moving out to the suburbs. And then, so what happened is that all of this money left with them. So then the cities just experienced this crazy shortfall of cash. Vietnam War was coming to a close. And, you know, it's like everybody was just suffering. You know, you had the oil crisis that hit. So gas prices were through the roof. So everything was like expensive. Like, this is like the Carter administration. Like Jimmy Carter was president around this time. Like Ford into Carter. But your cities were struggling. So then when you see like all the old 70s television shows or all the 70s movies where like the crazy crime and subways weren't safe and pickpockets and guys holding you up with a knife and taking your wallet, and you know, like the city was kind of nuts, you know, during this era, you know. So it was like a lot of people were struggling, and what the clubs afforded them, you know, particularly for people who were, you know, for gays, for people who were just the misfits of their families, you know, it afforded them a place where they could be themselves, feel safe, you know, and feel like they were going to be okay and had other like-minded people around them. You know, it's like, I just want to dance. I don't care where it is. I can go here and dance. I can get away from my home situation. I can get away from my neighborhood. And because the parties went all night into the morning, instead of leaving at 4 o'clock in the morning when like there's nobody on the streets and it's still dark and something can happen, stay until sunrise. You walk outside, it's daylight. You're safer. You know, so now you can, oh, well, now it's daylight, I can go home. Or
That's
the big thing is that if there was something like really hot that was played at the club, people would leave from like the garage or loft, they'd walk over to dance tracks. Dance tracks has long since been closed. I think they're still online though, I think. But I know, but the physical space has been closed, and that was on the east side, this lower east side area, just off of Avenue A, I believe. Like Avenue A, I want to say in like 3rd or 4th, somewhere abouts. But like they would go there, go to like a record shop in that area, buy whatever song, you know, that they just heard the DJ play like a couple hours ago, and then walk back to like, you know, Washington Square Park and hang out, or, you know, walk to like one of the parks, like Washington Square Park, Washington Park, Union Square, like, because you just go to the parks and hang out. But usually like Washington Square Park was like a big thing. Like go to the club, leave from out of the garage, go to Washington Square Park, hang out, get there. B-boys would be over on one side, you know, hanging out. Vulgars would be over on another side, hanging out. Loft dancers would be somewhere else, hanging out. People would be juggling and doing tricks. Guys would be telling jokes for money. It was like a real crazy circus atmosphere. And this is like the early 80s. You know, like it was like, you know, like all kinds of just artists and creative people, you know, and just like, and a lot of people like street, you know, performers. There's a lot of street performers that came out there.
So that was in the early 80s.
That's
and
early
when later in the 80s, house music came to New York.
Right. About like 84, 85.
Okay. How did it affect the dancing that was happening in clubs?
It didn't really.
It didn't?
Initially, it didn't really. The music itself didn't affect it, and that's because there's always been this controversy about who created house music.
Okay.
Because New York will be like, house music comes from New York. And Chicago will be like, you're a damn lie, because Chicago invented house music. The thing is that Chicago invented house music. But the term house was used initially to describe a New York-based DJ style of playing music. So it was created in Chicago, but it was inspired by New York. So when the music started coming back to New York, it fit right in with what they were already doing, because the inspiration was kind of coming off a New York paradigm, but then Chicago taking it and being like, okay. But basically it's like Frankie Knuckles. Frankie Knuckles is from here. Him and Larry Levan were peoples. They used to hang out, knew each other from like high school. They learned to DJ together like around the exact same time. You know, so they would go record shopping together. Like they, you know, they're friends. So Frankie leaves, you know, New York, goes to Chicago. he's playing at a spot called the Warehouse. The Warehouse, where they get the term house music from. But he's bringing his New York style to Chicago. And everybody's going crazy over the music he's playing and the way he's playing it.
So how are they playing it in Chicago that was different from New York? Because the music was the same, right?
Not always. I mean, I think it might. Honestly, I'm not even sure exactly why it's different. Looking at the playlist, this is something I'm still kind of like trying to figure out too. Looking at the playlist, a lot of the songs that Chicagoans consider like classic house, the same thing in New Yorkers, they just call it classics. You ever hear them talk about like a classics party? It's basically the same thing. But it's a lot of the same records. So I'm not sure where the line is, but it's something that Frankie was doing that they obviously said, oh, well, this is the type of stuff that they play at the Warehouse. I know that there were, for a lot of Chicago DJs like Steve Silk Hurley, you know, Funkmaster Farley, and a lot of those guys, they were doing, like, they would do edits. They would do radio edits. This whole thing, and do like these DJ edits, and then they'd go and like have like a early drum machine and like hook up a drum machine to have like a steady beat underneath it to kind of like hammer everything together, and then they would mix over that drum track and then clip everything together to make like this extended mixes and everything, and then play those on the radio. You know, and that was the whole thing. And they'd go up to the radio and be like, yo, here's my tape for this week. You know, and they'd play their mixes, you know, and then people like, oh, you hear Farley's mix? Oh, it wasn't crazy. Oh, yo, Jack Master's mix was incredible. Da da da. Yo, he did this with the track and he did that. But there's something in the way, something in the approach. And I'm not sure, because I don't, you know, I only know a handful of cats, you know, from Chicago that DJ, and I would have to really sit with them and figure out like what it was that was happening. And also because the way the scene was then, and the guys that I do know from Chicago that are DJing now, by the time they were in the scene, Frankie Knuckles' impact was already felt. So it'd be difficult to parse between what was purely Frankie and what stuff was purely Chicago, and where the mixture and crossing happened. I do know that, you know, that he brought a certain New York energy to it, and that's why it was identified as, oh, this is, yeah, that Warehouse sound, that house sound. This is house music. And that was from late 70s, early 80s, from that term. You know, so but by that time the garage had already been going. Like the garage construction parties were like 76. Then the garage officially opens in 77. I think like the winter. It's like at the beginning of 1977. So then, you know, so it had already been going, and then of course, you know, the loft had been going like officially from like, you know, like maybe like 73 or 74. Gallery had already been, you know, established. Studio 54 was about to open by like, you know, about like 76 or so, you know, like 76, 77. Like it was like all of these places, you know, were kind of already moving in New York. That style and that approach in those records were already being played, you know. So like Chicago got it and they made their own thing. And the same way with hip hop, where hip hop as a scene existed for a number of years before there was like an original hip hop track. House as a scene existed for a number of years before there was an original house track. You know. And so once that happened around like 84. Jamie Principle, the demo for Your Love. Like the official version of it came out in like 86, 87. I think it was 87. But like, and that was one that Frankie Knuckles like produced and mixed. But the original demo version that Jamie Principle did himself was 84. And it was not pressed on vinyl. The first one on vinyl it's either On and On or it's Like This. And it depends on who you ask, because some people will say it's one or the other. And that's 85. Those are the first ones pressed on vinyl. But this one was pressed on acetate, and it was on reel-to-reel, and is played in the club, I believe, off of a reel-to-reel.
Okay. So we spoke a little bit.
But it didn't change the dance, because New York just absorbed it absorbed it back as like, oh, this is kind of like what we were already doing. It's a little different, but it's not so different that, you know, thing. And also you got to remember, the people from like I'll say like the Mop Tops generation because they're probably like some of the more prominent people from that generation. Like the first people from that generation, that hip hop generation, to go into the house clubs, the first of them didn't really go into like the garage or any of the clubs like that until about like 86 or 87. So like the last years before the garage closed. So when you have these early house records, you know, in 85 hitting this club, mostly what you'll find there is like the garage heads, the old school loft dancers who were still, you know, going to the garage and still going to the loft. You know, the old club dancers were still there, you know, or people who had abandoned, you know, the early hip hop scene, you know, from the 70s and walked away from that to go to house. They weren't really that connected at the beginning. You know, it was very much like house is over here, club is over here, and the hip hop thing is over here. And we're not really like a lot of at the beginning even, you know, a lot of people were just like, oh yeah, that's seems too aggressive and violent, and we don't want nothing to do with that. We're going to be over here in the club dancing. You know, so bringing hip hop to the club, that really didn't happen until like really 87, 88. You know, and that's when you have a lot of the people from that second club generation come in. A lot of hip hop heads, you know, just about everybody from the Mop Tops comes in that second wave. You know, and their thing is that, you know, like they wanted a place to dance. A lot of hip hop places were getting shut down, and the hip hop parties are a little bit out of control and wild. And you know, it's like, look, I just want to dance and keep partying. I don't really care where it is, who it's by. So, oh, you need to go check out this place called the Garage. Oh, you need to come check out this club. You know, like the few lucky ones. Oh, you need to come. You know, I'll get you in at the Loft. Yo, you got to see how this gets down, how this gets down. And introduce people. Oh, you ever been to the Choice? Come on, I'll show you. Also, what was happening was that you had a lot of parties, like, you know, this brother named Basil was doing parties in Voodoo Ray, who was, you know, down with Mop Tops, was like basically like he asked Voodoo Ray to help him like host, put together these parties. And so they were, you know, they were like bringing like a lot of the younger hip hop heads that had started hearing about house or hearing it at like mixed music parties, and like, oh, we're gonna put together our own thing. So people were going to Kilimanjaros, you know, or like the old tunnel, and you go to different rooms, and they're like, one room would be playing house, another room would be playing hip hop, maybe another section would be playing reggae, you know, depending on what like floor you went to on the club or what room you went to in the club. You know, so that would be where a lot of people get exposed to it and be like, yo, I really like this house music. Oh, you need to come to this place because they just played this all night. Oh, really? Okay, where is that? You know, that's when the dance changed. But the only reason why the dance changed is because it was a generational shift.
Okay.
So it basically was, it's not that like the loft dancers didn't change how they moved. They have always been loft, and they haven't really ever changed their movement. You know, the only change that happened with them was that there was like a whole thing of like capoeira got really big in New York around like 93, 94. And so people incorporated some of that. But the thing is, cats were already doing floor movement. They had been doing floor movement, you know, since the beginning. So it was just that for people who couldn't get the floor movement, they were grabbing stuff from capoeira and just kind of like, oh, I'm going to just use this as my shortcut to get to the floor. Because I see the loft dancers doing it, and I want to do what they do, but I can't do what they do. I haven't figured out how they do it. Oh, but now I'm seeing this guy do it in capoeira. Oh, I'm going to flip it. I'm going to flip this, but I'm going to just do it in the club this way. You know, and so that's how a lot of people just kind of figured out the floor stuff. You know, and that's, like I said, this is like this is like in the 90s. I think the brother's name, like Which Way Shah, has said, you know, he had said that that the cat that kind of introduced it was this guy, Jose Figueroa. That's, you know, like that he contends that that's the guy that was like in the clubs, like doing like straight up capoeira movement in there. And then all the younger guys that knew that knew him started like, oh, well, can I train with you, or can you just show me how to do that? And kind of like taking that and bringing that, you know, like following him and bringing that into the club. But like the loft dancers had been going on the floor. A lot of them were more inspired by kung fu movies, acrobats, you know, certain like Nicholas Brothers tap dance tricks, you know, like, you know, just like that sort of thing. gymnast.
Whilst we're on the dancing part of the interview, I wanted to ask, when did house dance come into the studio environment, and how do you think it affected dancing in the club afterwards?
The Mop Tops basically made it possible to teach house.
Okay.
I don't know of anybody else. I've never heard of anybody else. The only thing that I heard once, the closest it almost happened, but it didn't happen, was Bravo had tried to get a classroom somewhere to teach.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah, I heard.
It's raining in New York. It's raining something awful right now. After being cold for months, now we get rain. Lots of rain. But
Yeah.
Bravo had been trying to like teach a class somewhere, and no dance studio
When
was
was
interested. This is like 80 something, like early 80s.
Oh, okay.
He was trying to like get space to be able to teach a class, and they weren't trying to have it. They were just like, who wants to do that stuff? In America, there's this problem of high culture, low culture. So a lot of times they'll be like, oh, well, it's not ballet or modern. You didn't go to an accredited school for it, so no, we're not interested. And not in terms like in an art environment. I mean, they'll do it as entertainment, but then it's just like, oh, it's a fad. It'll blow over. It's cute for right now, and then they ignore it. So, trying to bring it to the classroom, like that didn't happen for him. But then, later coming into like the 90s, like the Mop Tops basically, they're the ones responsible for codifying the movement. And really what they did is that they just took all the movement that they shared. Like when you think about like what house dance is and what is taught as house dance, it's like what house dance is 100%, right? But what's taught as house dance is maybe 10%.
Really?
Because what they did, because it's like they created a way of giving people access to it, and then in their understanding, it's like, but it's also being spoiled. It's like when you're spoiled with growing up with dancing and growing up with music as a part of your culture, then it's like somebody just has to show you a few basic steps, and then you take the rest of the step yourself.
Right. You
listen to the music, you vibe out, you experience it, and then you fill in the gaps on your own. So you don't really have to show you but 10%. The rest of the 90% is the rest of your life and your input. So they just took all the steps that everybody shared. They just like, okay, everybody does the skate. Okay, we'll teach them that. That's something that that everybody from our generation that does this, we all share this. So that's part of it. Everybody, everyone does the farmers. So we're gonna show them the farmers. And then there was a whole thing about agreeing on names, which still is controversial. But this is what happens with folk culture. With any sort of folklore, there's always going to be discrepancies. Really, history is never 100% anyway, because depending on whose perspective
it's true.
Someone could say like, oh, we are fighting aggression from whoever, and it's like, you weren't fighting aggression. You guys are a bunch of like separatist terrorists. It's a perspective thing. So like, they basically, they took all the common movement that everybody shared that linked them together. They basically took the movement that bonded themselves and their friends and their generation of dancers in the club. And then they set about teaching that.
Okay.
So they taught the movement that unified them instead of teaching the stuff that separates them. Because they could have just said like, this is my style. This is the this is the Tom McGregor style, and I'm only going to teach you this. Only just the stuff that I do, nothing else. Instead, it's like, he teaches some of the stuff that he does, but he also teaches you things to where, it's something that where you see someone else and be like, oh, that person's doing the Dodger. I can get in with them now, and now we have a connection. We can share this dance together. So that's what, that's basically they taught this stuff that unified them.
Okay.
And they expected that people would take the rest of the steps themselves. The thing that nobody considered was that no one else has a club culture like New York.
That is
like,
true, yeah.
Like, it's like they didn't really, like, they can't really teach lofting. It's not really their story to teach. Like the loft dancers, they'd be like, oh, you want to learn lofting? Come to the club. Oh, you want to come, like, hell, even up until 10 years ago, some of the old heads are like, you can't teach house dance. Because for them, nobody taught them per se.
Okay.
They had just kept coming to the club and just kept dancing. And then one day turned around and was like, oh, cool, I could do handstands. Oh, hey, cool, I got this spin down that I really wanted. You know, they just learn being in the community. You learn by going out. You learn by doing. You learn by vibing with the music. But again, that's a cultural thing. Like when you grow up in a culture where, like, from the time when you're small, it's the birthday party, we dance. It's a block party, we dance. You know, hell, even in like in New Orleans, somebody dies, we dance. You know, it's like, you know, you have these, you know, you go to church on Sundays, people are dancing. Like music and dancing is sewn into everyday life. Rhythm is sewn into everyday life. Even the games that children play, when you have the whole like hand games and clapping. So you're learning, like, you think about what that does in terms of coordination in the brain, like in terms of neurobiology, you're learning about tone and rhythm and timing all at the same time. So, because you have to keep the rhythm with somebody else, then you have to sing along with what they're doing. So you got to still, like, you know, like mesh their voices and match the note. You know, so you're singing a song, clapping hands with somebody, and creating a rhythm. So both of you have to sing on the rhythm that you're both creating. Like
That's true.
It's like when you start breaking it down, and these are children's games.
So it becomes very, very natural, you know,
to
explore and develop yourself, right? But learn by what is taught to you.
Right.
So how do you think house dance is being interpreted by the people who don't have that culture, don't have that, you know, family dancing culture, the clubbing culture, and so on?
Some people do very well, and other people make me very concerned.
Okay.
There's some people that so there's some people that I'm amazed by, like just what it is that they're able to do and how it is they're able to do it. And I don't know how it found them or how they found it, but it's beautiful to behold. Other times I look at things and I'm just like, okay, you're on beat, but are you really listening to what the music's telling you? Like there's a long-standing tradition of like when people say like the feeling is a part way between what you feel emotionally and what the music is giving you emotionally, and it's like taking the tonality of the music into account. It's not just simply just the pattern and the beat. It's like, you know, is the music on top of it smooth, or is it angular and rough? Is it sensual, or is it aggressive? Is it exuberant, or is it subdued? Is it and not just one or the other, but where on that range are you? You know, and then are there different parts to it? So it might be that the bass line is really like up, you know, just very like energetic, but then the keys are very mellow. As a dancer, you can bounce back and forth between both of those vibes. So you can start off with the keys and mellow, and then start jumping into the bass line and then bring the pace up. You know, or as the music shifts and changes. So for the chorus, it's one sort of energy, but then when the verses come, it's this, but then it goes to the bridge and it does something else. Then the break comes in and then it's something else. And so you change your flow to match that. Your body becomes part of the instrumentation. There's a lot of people that, because I think they learn patterns,
right,
then they treat it like a pattern. So they just simply do patterns. They don't understand that those patterns are supposed to modify based on what the music is doing and based on what you're feeling. But then if you come from a culture where you're not taught to tap into your feelings, or access to that is not, you know, is not encouraged, then there's no real expression. It's just simply mimicking. So you just simply mimic something, and so even if you're on beat, you're not in a rhythm. You know, even if you're in rhythm, you're not in the groove of it. You know, you're not in the feeling of it, really. You know, because that's when people talk about like what the feeling is. Like the feeling is that, you know, that exuberant, spiritual, you know, emotional openness that the music gives you. But the thing is, like, if you don't have any connection to the music, then what does it mean to you? Then it's just moves. It's just, I'm moving while music's playing. But that's not, like, for academic dance, that'll count as dance. I'm moving while music's playing. For academic dance, that makes perfect sense. But in African traditions, dance and music are one. They're together. There's no separating the two. So, you know, and for African American traditions, the thing is that, you know, you follow the music. You and the music are one. You know, so it's not freedom from the beat, that sounds crazy. You know, the music is the freedom. That, I mean, really, in a very real sense. You know, because even during slavery, post-slavery, with all the oppression that followed it, the only parts of life a lot of times that you know, the African Americans had that validated their existence or validated themselves as just beautiful people loved by universe and God, was that, you know, well, we have this connection with each other through the music. I can feel good dancing to the music, and I still remember some of the music from where I come from, and so I'm going to try to keep as much of that alive as I can. And because in the United States versus the Caribbean, where they were allowed to keep their drums, in the United States drums were banned, and part of it was due to uprisings that happened where they were using the drums to communicate. You know, like there was like slave revolts, and they were using drums to communicate to the other slaves. Like, oh, we're about to burn down the plantation now. All right, everybody attack. When they found that there was a source of it, they banned them. So the only place that was allowed to keep drums was New Orleans, and the only place where they were allowed to be played was in Congo Square. Congo Square is the birthplace of jazz. You know, but like everywhere else, the drums were banned. So then that rhythm, you're still trying to keep the rhythm alive. So you have to adapt. So then they adapted the rhythms, so then they switched it to the hand claps carry the rhythms. The other instruments carry the rhythms. So now the bass is being played to cover some of the rhythm that's lost because the drum can't play those rhythms anymore. The piano takes over and carries some of the rhythm. You know, the guitar plays some of the rhythm. You know, so these things change, and then but then people still respond to it because the rhythms are still there. You know, you're exposed to other dancers. You know, so like now you can't do all of your traditional dances. You know, they're trying to force you to do, like, you know, these minuets and contras and all this other stuff. So now you've got that imposed upon the rhythm that is natural for your body and for your culture. So do you adapt it to like fit better? Like, okay, well, if I have to wear these clothes that they're telling me I have to wear, I'm going to wear them in a way that's comfortable for me. So you start adapting some of the European influence and still try to keep as much of like your African influence as possible. You know, and then that becomes the new norm of the culture and it's passed down. But a lot of it is preserving a lot of the feeling that people grew up with, you know, whether it's secular, you know, or whether it's sacred. Is keeping those aspects of culture alive, and it's been passed down so much. A lot of times, people don't even realize how connected it is with history. Like, these dances don't exist in a vacuum; they're people's stories. You know, these are lives lived. You know, and these go back generations. And every movement comes from somewhere. They don't just pop up from like out the blue. You know, it comes from something. It comes from experience. It comes from a people. It comes from a history. The thing is, most people don't really consider what that history is. I was lucky. Like, I guess I'm becoming a self-made scholar. That's just because I asked a lot of questions. I was lucky enough to be around older cats that actually told me stuff. You know, I was like, oh yeah, you know, we used to do this. Oh, we used to go here. Yeah, I used to hang out with this guy. Oh, I know the guy that did that. He was this guy from this place or whatever. But, you know, a lot of times people just like, oh, just show me the movement.
So from your story, basically I understand that in African culture or Afro-American culture, the meaning is much more important than aesthetics of the dance, right? So that's the difference.
The feeling of it is like there's still an aesthetic and a craft to it, and it's like being able to read something. Like, you can look at somebody and you can look at something with the sound off and tell when somebody's on beat. You know, you can look at somebody dance, and if you know how to read it, you can read who they learned from, what they learned, where they're from, where their people are from, you know, or what type of people they've been around, what their experience with music is, how long have they been dancing. You know, like, you can get a gauge for these things. Like, you know, like, there's something where, you know, where Archie was saying, because I spent a lot of time like now I can actually spend a lot of time talking to people and a lot of more time on YouTube finding things. Before there was nothing. But there's an interview with Archer where he talks about, like, you know, if you watch somebody dance, they'll tell you everything you need to know about them. Yeah, it's very real. It's very real. And when I saw him, when I saw that video and he said that, I was like, that's how I felt forever. And that's how a lot of people have felt. You know, it's like, you know, the dance will tell you everything about somebody. You know, how comfortable they are in their own skin, how comfortable they are with their own sexuality. You know, like, it tells you everything. Or, you know, it gives you insight into their personality. How do they hold space? How do they deal with other people? You know, what are they going through at the moment? You know, so it's like, it's a balance between the technique, but also the emotive quality. You know, it can't be just one over the other. You can't just kind of like wild out and just kind of flail your arms wildly. Like, there are times when that's respected. You know, we're like, okay, that guy can't really dance well, but his heart is in it. There's a certain amount of respect you do get just because your heart is in it, and you're actually feeling the music, and you're actually showing the love for the music. Because people usually will believe, like, well, maybe they'll get the technique. They already have the love, so they'll keep coming back because you already have the love for it. So maybe over time they'll develop the technique. It's giving them the benefit of the doubt. There's people who have the technique, and it's just like, you got the technique already. You have none of the love for the music. Yeah, that's a problem. I think that you asked earlier about in terms of like how, you know, going to the studio changes thing. There's a lot of people who think that they are house dancing because they have the movement. They're not. Like, it's not just the movement. It is very much the emotional quality to the music, you know. And one of the things that bothers me is that people treat house as if there's no history to the music in the movement. You know, like, if you ask a b-boy, rattle off some classic b-boy records from the beginning of b-boying to, like, you know, its apex to its revival, they can name, like, they may have a hard time figuring out what was going on in the revival. But if in the beginning, like, everybody kind of knows, like, okay, Melting Pot, you know, okay, you know, 5 different James Brown records, you know, like, they can kind of, like, you know, Synthetic Substitution, like, they can name a couple of breaks. They're aware of, like, there being a musical history that, you know, for b-boying extends before hip-hop. You know, so, like, b-boying's a hip-hop dance, but the bulk of the music the cats were b-boying to was not technically hip-hop music. And everybody's okay with that. There's no contradiction in that. It makes perfect logical sense. They respect that it comes from somewhere. For some strange reason, you know, house, the culture for house has never died. It never needed to come back because it never died. Nobody thinks that there's it's like the scene goes back to like 68. So why is it that nobody ever talks about any of the music from that era and how that it influences what becomes later known as house? Or even if you say for whatever unknowable reason, whatever blasphemous reason, you want to somehow act like, okay, well, we're just going to start it with, you know, with just the mop tops, and we'll ignore, you know, 10 years of history, you know, 15 years of history before them. Just say, for sake of argument, you want to ignore all that other history and just start with just like the people who codified it. Even then, the music that they were dancing to still goes back to the late 70s, early 80s, because the clubs they were going to were still playing a lot of those same records. And that's still part of where the dance comes to. There's a reason why jacking works on certain house records and doesn't work on others. Look at the dates. Certain songs, they're designed in a way where you could see, of course, this dance fits perfectly in the groove of this song. It comes from this particular time. It makes perfect sense, you know. So like when you start listening to like a lot of like late 80s, early 90s house, you're talking about the rise of like the whole like mop top generation of house dancers, them and like all the people, you know, mop tops, you know, Brian Green, like, you know, all these guys and girls that, you know, like them rising to prominence in like the hip hop and house dance and hip house, you know, dance circles and everything. So then stuff like the Farmers makes perfect sense. You know, you listen to like a lot of those house records and like it's right in the pocket. It fits perfectly with that rhythm, so it makes sense for it to exist then. But then when you start listening to like the music that comes afterwards, the middle 90s, and everybody starts going into like, now they're starting to add like a little bit of like Latin jazz and Afro jazz influences into stuff. You know, gospel house starts making a resurgence, you know, and then so you start, you know, it's like some of the elements of this music change. You know, some of the elements in the dance changes or opens up, or something that was not as big at one point now comes back again. But if you're not aware of how those things work together, then you're still you're still dancing too hard to love songs, you know, which is what happens. You know, it's a love song, it's got a beautiful flute melody, it's very relaxed, it's flowing. But people aren't moving their shoulders, they're to a love song. Where's the love?
Okay.
You know, so I mean, and that's one of the things I think is changed, is that people don't realize like there's an experience in the music that if you follow the trail of the music, you'll understand why even the people who jack harder than anyone you know from the folk that introduced it, when the music changes, and even underneath all that hard jacking, there's still at the core of it, there's still this smoothness. There's still a flow that's underneath everything that carries it. You know, no matter what, there's always a flow. So no matter if it goes to hard or to soft, high level, low level, is always flowing. And that part of that is dealing with the history of the music as well, and you know, and respecting, you know, the decades of underground dance culture that preceded it.
Okay. I have just a couple of last questions about the clubbing culture. I wanted to ask you, when did the open air house parties started to become popular in New York, and what was, for you, what was the difference between in the experience of being in the club and experiencing house music, and then being open air and experiencing that?
Some people would say from the 70s, but the reason why is because everyone was doing park jams, not just the Bronx. It's just that the Bronx park jams became the centerpiece that hip hop came out of. Everywhere else, they would just have people playing music in the parks. Then those kind of shut down for a while. The first ones that I know of, Lil Ray and the House Music Jamboree, and I think they're coming into almost like 15 years now.
All right. Okay.
Maybe more, actually. It may actually be more than that. But I didn't go to one of those until around like 97 or 98. It was when I went to the first one. But I know he'd already done at least one, if not a few, beforehand. So you're talking about like middle 90s. And from what I understand, it was a thing of a lot of those guys were all like, you know, club heads, garage, loft, baseline, Leviticus, Kontiki, Gallery, Sanctuary, you know, Ozone Layer. Like, there's so many clubs that people don't shout out, you know, but like just all around like Manhattan and Brooklyn. But they were all, so they basically is like they had kind of gotten older. Some people were raising families. They couldn't really be out in the clubs like how they used to, but they still wanted to party. And also they wanted to be able to show their children the type of music that they were dancing to and the type of vibe that was created. So with his own money, you know, Ray, you know, rented the sound system, brought his records, asked a couple of DJs that he knew that were friends of his to come and spin to, and set up and got a permit to set up in Prospect Park and play records, you know. And so that was like that's one of the earliest ones that I know of in terms of New York. There's that. There was Preston, DJ Preston, who was doing these parties at Coney Island on the boardwalk also. He was in the first one. He doesn't do them anymore, but other people have picked up after him. So like now there's like 3 different organizations that have kind of like, you know, that have kind of picked up after him. But like, you know, he was one of the first ones that I know of. But mind you, I only started coming through in 95, you know, like the end of 95. So really, you know, there may be other folk, but those weren't the ones I was privy to. like, you know, but like the first two that I know of was Lil Ray, Preston, and then there was also a woman. Oh man, I can't remember her name now. She used to do a backyard party every year in the summer, and I went to one of those, and that was like 98 maybe 98, maybe 99. And it was like a backyard party, get all the DJ friends that she knew once a year, pay like, I think like $20 or $25 or something, all you can eat. You still had to buy your drinks at the bar. And people just dancing in her backyard. She had like a nice little backyard space. And you're just out there just dancing all night into the morning. And
how was the
has
experience?
It changed the experience?
For
I'll
you?
put it to you like this. There is nothing like dancing to a song about sunshine at like when the sun is up. Like there's nothing like being outside. Like there was like the backyard party, I'll never forget, it was one of the most beautiful moments ever. It was, I think Lil Ray was DJing actually at the time. Coming into the morning, it started to rain. It started raining. DJ puts on Shaka Khan's Clouds. You familiar with the song? Clouds?
No.
Okay. Clouds by Shaka Khan. In the chorus she sings, "It's Gonna Rain." And just the whole crowd went nuts. Because it started raining, and the DJ mixes into "It's gonna rain, gonna rain," and everyone's like, "Oh my God!" and just you keep dancing, getting soaked in the rain. Nobody cares, you know. Then the rain starts, you know, like it rained, like it was like a brief shower. So the rain it starts drizzling and raining. Then it starts like, you know, and this is just at dawn. So then the sun starts coming up. He mixes into another Shaka Khan record. I Live You, I Love You. And that one, of course, is "Love to See the Sun in the Morning." So then that hits, and just, it was like, oh my God. Just, it was like the perfect synchronicity of like nature and music and movement. And it was just so beautiful. And there's just nothing like those sort of movements. Like be out in the elements and just dancing to beautiful music around like people who are just passionate about the music as you are. There is nothing like that feeling ever in life. Nothing like that feeling. And I've been blessed to experience that type of vibe a number of times. There's just nothing like that. You know, it's beautiful. You know, like,
amazing.
Yes, it is amazing. Oh my God. Like that's one of my fondest memories. You know, just like that. Just, what do you even say to like moments like that? You know.
So where would you say people who live in New York probably know, but there's a lot of foreigners coming to New York wanting to experience the house music scene. What are the places that you could suggest, and indoors and outdoors they could do that? Some certain parties or clubs or, you know, any other events?
Libation.
I know, plug.
Yes, plug. Shameless plug. I have to, because they'll watch this video and I'll be taken to task if I don't. But no, even if I wasn't working with Libation would be one of them. Okay. Because I'll say Libation, it is for range. I would say Libation, I would say Funkbox, and I'll explain why, and I would say BKNY. Starting with those three. There's a whole bunch more, but I've started with those three. Reason being, Libation is a nice balance between the old and new culture. So you have a lot of the old school heads that come through, and Ian plays a lot of the old school records. But he also plays a lot of the newer stuff as well, and you got a lot of the younger heads that come through as well. And it's a balance between both of those generations. Funkbox, because you need something to gauge it against. Funkbox, I think, is a type of party that people would expect to see coming from overseas, because it's not really house culture per se, it's more of dancer culture. Because even though the music they play is house and they play like underground soulful house, the culture of it is very much about like the underground house clubs is primarily house dancers and loft dancers. funk box, you got b-boys, you got lockers, you got poppers, you got flex dancers, you got voguers, you got house dancers, of course, you got freestylers, you got everybody's in there all at once doing mad circles. And you know, it's like that culturally is not the same. You know, you got whackers, shout out to the whackers. You know, but you got like, you know, all these different dance styles all in one room vibing together. That is kind of like it's like the information clearinghouse, you know, for dancers. So like you go to funk, like for me, I go to Funk Box because I know there's certain people that I'll be able to see. I'll be able to find out who's in town, who just got back. You know, it's a good place to go to like get your bearings and then find out what else is going on. You know, so like go there, find out what other parties are happening, link in with people, make connections. Sometimes some of the OGs are there. You can like hang out with like the originals. You get introductions to people, you know, like, so it's a good way to like, you know, meet other dancers and then maybe find out what other parties are going on. So that's why I would suggest Funk Box for that reason. BKNY, because BKNY for me is like that, is like how I remember it when I came in the 90s. Large space, fairly large space, wood floors, after hours. So the party starts at 10, but it doesn't end until 8 o'clock in the morning. So normally for me, I'll show up at like 2 or 3. I don't show up before 2 o'clock. I do it like how I did back in the 90s. You show up from like 2, 3 o'clock, maybe 4, and you party until like 8 o'clock. Although it used to be that you could party until like noon, which is even more incredible. But, you know, because that was the whole thing. Because by that point, all the party tourists are gone. And all you get is just like the real hardcore underground house heads. And with BKNY, most of their clientele, most of the people that go out are old school loft dancers, old school garage heads, people that went to all the classic, you know, clubs in New York and Brooklyn and everything like that. So it's like a window into like that whole 90s vibe, New York underground. Even to like the point where you leave and like you walk out and are we going to go get breakfast, or well, let's just stop and get a sandwich and then go home. You know, like even that part of it, you know. So those three for me, I would say those are ones to check out, because you want to be able to have something you can gauge it against. Like, okay, Funk Box, you come in from overseas, Funk Box will immediately feel familiar. Whole bunch of people jumping around, blending styles that they maybe haven't fully mastered yet, but they're experimenting with stuff. A whole bunch of circles and people battling is familiar. So you're coming from overseas, you're used to like a battle culture, that makes perfect sense. But folk don't really battle like that in the underground house. I would even say that house in and of itself isn't really a battle dance per se. Like you can, but at its root, it's not really a battle dance. It's some freedom dancing. You know, it's like it is a spiritual thing, like the song says. You know, it's about getting free on an emotional level to music. You know, like using the music as your platform to like free yourself, even if it's just temporarily. So, you know, like and so like with Libation, with BKNY, those are parties where you can get that. If you want to catch like a flashback of in terms of what it was like during like the loft and garage era, if you happen to be in town and they're doing the Prince and King parties, go to those. Prince and King got its name because of the location of the loft and the garage. The loft, 99 Prince Street, and then King Street was where the garage was. The King between, what was that? I forgot what the cross streets were. It's a Verizon building now. It's like a few blocks away from, actually I think it's like a block away from SOB's now. But yeah, but like, so it's just, they took the name of the two streets that both of those places are on, Prince and King, and they play all the music from that era. Like all the music from like the loft and garage. So like, if you want to get a vibe of what that's like, there's that party. In terms of like the underground club culture, if you catch like a Larry Levan, like the Paradise Garage reunion party, you know, if you can get your tickets to that, go to that. Don't expect to have too much space. The garage is a different vibe from the loft. the loft, there was a lot of room to move. It was a smaller venue. It was also a little bit more raw in terms of the dancing. Like, you know, cats are very expressive. The garage, there wasn't really all that much room. It was normally everybody was packed in, but then people were just vibing out to the music, so they didn't really care. You had maybe like a square meter, if you were lucky, a square meter of space. And then, you know, like, and you just kind of made that square meter work. So that was, you had to do everything. Your turns, up to this, you know, coming up, go down to the ground, come back, dance with somebody, all in a square meter worth of space. For those of you who don't know metrics, you know, you can say it's a square yard.
Okay.
I know, but dealing with an international audience, most people know like the metric system.
What about the other places like Shelter and Coney
Shelter,
Island?
and that's what I was, yes.
Yeah.
I'm not, yes, Shelter is a good place to go. It gives you like the whole classic underground vibe on Sundays. Coney Island, any of the Coney Island parties will give you a decent vibe on it. Because it's splintered now and there's different groups doing it, try all of them, go back for the one that really vibes with you. Okay. That's what I'll say. Like, go check all of them out, but go back for the one that really speaks to you. You know, I'm not going to put one person over the other in terms of the Coney Island thing. I'm not going to play the politics of that. Fort Greene Park was Soul Summit.
Oh, right, yes.
Go to those. Go to those. Because that one will have everybody out, old school dancers that didn't even realize that the scene was still happening will come out, you know, like so many people come out to that. And then they do it in Fort Greene Park, and the last couple of years they've also done it at Restoration Plaza, which is further into Bed-Stuy. So you can either do the one in Fort Greene or you can do the one in Bed-Stuy. Both of those, I would say, go to both of those without fail. They're amazing. You know, they're amazing experiences. Because and when you go, like, by all means, go to the circles. The circles are fine. Also take some time to dance outside of the circles. Also take some time to walk around. Take some time to sit down and just watch people. Just watch and observe. Why? Because you'll notice that, like, there's a lot that happens that has nothing to do with the circles. The circles are only like one place, one part of the overall ecosystem of like the underground community. You know, I mean, like I said, like there were not many, if any, circles in a lot of the old school clubs. You know, it's like the hip hop generation brought that into house. You know, there weren't circles really before. You know, so for myself and the guys that came in with me, you know, this whole like third generation, like for us, we're as comfortable being in circles as we are being outside of them. You know, because when we came into it, we were coming into it when the whole idea of teaching house was being established even as an idea. Like, you can teach this. When we were still seeing a lot of the loft dancers, you know, they were like, you know, 20 years younger, 15 years younger, 10 years younger. So a lot of them still had it. You know, they were like in their 40s, like just touching 40. So you're still kind of spry. You still had their flexibility. They were doing a lot more. You know, so like we got to see that, and then we got to see like, you know, the mop tops, you know, and in like, you know, in their late 20s, middle 20s. You know, and we were all coming and seeing it. We were like 18, 15 in some cases, 20, 19. You know, so it was like seeing all these people, and they still had like a lot of the energy to go from two different generations, and at one point from two different perspectives. And so for us, it was trying to find a harmony between both of them. You know, like saying like, okay, there's sometimes when you actually do want to circle, and it doesn't have to be about competition. It can be about people just vibing and sharing. And oh, I'm inspired by what you did, and now I'm going to go in the circle and share my inspiration with you. And then, you know, it's like, you know, so there are moments to it, but there's also a moment when like you don't need to be in the circle, and you just kind of wouldn't be out dancing with somebody, or just even dancing by yourself in the crowd.
Feeling, yes.
And it's like, and sometimes you don't even want to do a step. You just throw your hands in the air and just
yeah.
in this for like half a song. And there's times when like you get so caught up that you can't really dance. You can't think of anything to do. You just all you can do is you just stop and just throw your head back and just smile and just sway and just sway. And then like,
so true.
And then when the song mixes to something else, then you kind of come out of the trance, and then you're kind of back and you're like, oh, okay. woo, all right, I'm going to go sit down, or I'm going to go and get a drink.
Okay.
You know, but like I was like all of those, and there's a whole bunch of other parties too.
Research people.
Yeah,
research.
like research. Dance Deets, you know, has a lot of stuff up on there. Also, just like I'll say this: ask dancers, but follow DJs. So like, ask other dancers what parties they're going to, what they dig, but when you go, pay attention to who the DJs are, especially if there's a guest. You know, and follow the DJs, because you'll know, oh, this DJ's playing here. All right, I'm gonna go check this DJ out. Also with New Jersey, the New Jersey scene too. It's like a lot of the parties at Coffee Cave. You know, so like, you know, like Ian Friday has a night at Coffee Cave. Jihad Muhammad's been there for a very long time doing his thing at Coffee Cave too. Zandy, you know, Zandy, her thing. If you can catch her, you know, spinning wherever she spins. Sabine, DJ Sabine, you know, there's a lot of ladies out there doing their thing. You know, like find DJs that speak to you, that you like what they play, or that DJs that just play the range of music that you're listening for. Follow them as well. You know, check out a party on someone's recommendation, but if it doesn't catch you, you know, I would like that everybody loves Libation. That would help me out a whole lot. However, everything isn't for everybody. You know, like some people hear it and be like, oh, this is the most awesome thing ever. You know, this is better than the invention of sliced cheese. Other people, they'll be like, yeah, I don't get it.
Right.
I'm going to go back to this other party. I'm going to, you know, and so, you know, like everything isn't for everybody. You kind of can't convince people to like stuff they don't like.
That's true.
Yeah,
So we're at the end of the interview. I just wanted to ask if you have any final comments or shout outs. You're welcome.
Shout outs. Shout out to Afro Mosaic Soul. 1. Shout out to Ashe Dance Theater Collective. 2. Shout out to Rhythmic Nomads. Those people who know who they are. Shout out to the Rhythm Conclave, which I don't know if you guys even watch this because they never are on social media or anything like that. But if you guys see it, I shouted you out. Those are all the people I'm affiliated with. Also, shout out to everybody else that, you know, is part of the larger dance family. So shout out to all my shelter heads. Shout out to all the loft dancers. Shout out to all my garage family. Shout out to, like, you know, to the league, you know, like Ivy League. Shout out to y'all, you know, the family, you know. Shout out to Step Fiends. It's also extended family. Shout out to Mawu. You know, love those ladies. That's also extended family. You know, a lot of them all came in the club scene around the same time I did. You know, so we all kind of have that same generational experience. Shout out to just everyone that's come after us that loves house. You know, it's not easy. Shout out to all the people who are, you know, trying to do the academic thing regarding, you know, street dance and do it properly. You know, by the way, thank you as being one of those people.
Thank you.
Shout out to the DJs and the venue owners, particularly the venue owners, because it's hard to keep an underground party in New York. Things have changed a lot, and it's very difficult to get spaces that'll even allow for, you know, those sort of parties to happen. Yeah, shout out to people that understand why we need baby powder. Inside joke. Just ask about the baby powder later. Trying to think of other shout outs. Shout out to Second to Last, who are the people that brought me through to the Tea Party open mic. Shout out to everybody from Libation, the whole Libation team. Shout out to Bade Francis, who was the person who introduced me to everybody from the Mob Tops. He's one of the first people to like introduce me to a lot of people in the club scene. Thank you. Wow, I mean, shout out to...
Wow, that was a lot of shout outs.
I could be here forever. I mean, but I mean, really just
shout out to everyone.
Yeah, shout out to like the whole planet Earth, you know. Even the people who aren't doing good, shout out to you, because you make it, you know, you make doing good all that much more important. So, yeah. No, but yeah, got love for everybody. And I probably forgot somebody. Shout out to all the people whose name I didn't call.
Well, we didn't mention everyone, so...
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your time and for your experience. And
I'm sure this will be edited crazily because I know.
Oh no, we upload it as it is.
Wow.
So yeah, usually. So yeah.
Put a disclaimer at the front telling people to like make sure they have their chips and everything.
Oh yeah, yeah.
If you made it this far,
popcorn.
God bless you.
Shout out to you if you made it this far.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much.
No problem.
And as usual, find more information
Shout out
in
to
the
description.
Mop tops. As usual, find more information on this description of this video. And
Misfits too. Shout out to the Misfits.
Yes, the Misfits.
Shout out to the Wise Guys.
Oh my gosh.
Scuba Scrap. Steezo.
If you're interested in more content like that, subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. We're everywhere. And see you next time. Thank you.
Peace.